Patsy Cline's voice could be heard on jukeboxes and radios, but her life was full of heartbreak, dedication, and a sudden, terrible end. Her story is just as haunting as her songs, from her empty house to the family she left behind. Where did her husband, her 2 young children, and the money she made go? Let's find out what Patsy Cline's sad heritage is. Patsy Cline, the famous country music star, gave what would be her last live shows on March 3, 1963. The event was held at the Soldiers and Sailors Memorial Hall in Kansas City, Kansas, to help the family of Cactus Jack Call, a famous local DJ who had died in a car accident a little over a month before. The event was a kind act from the country music community. It brought together some of the best artists in the genre for a day of song and unity. Cline continued to perform 3 times that day, at 2 p.m., 5:15 p.m., and 8:15 p.m., even though she had a cold that wouldn't go away. She was so dedicated to the cause and to her fans that she was ready to sing even though she was sick. At all 3 shows, she gave powerful performances that left people standing. The theater was packed every time, which shows how famous the performers were and how much support there is for Call's family during this sad time. It was a who's who of country music stars from the early 1960s. Stars like George Jones, George Riddle and the Jones Boys, Billy Walker, Doy West, Wilma Lee and Stoney Cooper, George McCormick, and the Clinch Mountain Boys were also on the bill. There was Cowboy Copas and Hawkshaw Hawkins. Many of them were not only Cline's co-workers but also close friends. The artists' friendships and respect for each other made the event even more moving. Not only did Cline's 3 shows that day stand out for their music, but also for the way she dressed. For the 2 p.m. show, she wore a light sky blue dress with lots of tulle that sparkled under the stage lights and made her look soft and airy. At 5:15 p.m., she changed into a bright red dress for the show, which went well with her strong stage personality and dramatic voice. To make her last showing at 8:15 p.m., she picked a long white chiffon dress, which was sad and almost symbolic because it would be the last thing she ever wore on stage. The last song Cline sang at her last show was a very moving version of a song she had made only a month before. The words about being strong and independent hit home with the crowd, and now that she is leaving the stage, they have an even deeper meaning. Everyone there didn't know it, but that was the last time they would see her sing live. The next day, on March 5, 1963, Patsy Cline died in a plane crash with Cowboy Copas and Hawkshaw Hawkins, 2 other acts. Following her last shows in Kansas City on March 3, 1963, Patsy Cline spent the night at the Townhouse Motor Hotel. Heavy fog at Fairfax Airport made it impossible to see, so she had to delay her flight back to Nashville the next day. While they were waiting for things to get better, Cline's longtime friend and fellow artist Doy West made them a very kind offer. Her husband Bill and she were taking an 8-hour drive back to Nashville, and she asked Patsy to join them. But Cline said no. She was always sure of herself and seemed at peace. "Don't worry about me, Hose," she allegedly said with a calm sense of doom. "When it's my time to go, it's my time." On March 5, Cline called her mom from the room to say goodbye. After that, around 12:30 p.m., she checked out of the hotel and went to the airport. A Piper PA-24 Comanche with the tail number N7000P, a small private plane, was going to take her back to the airport. Randy Hughes was in charge of the plane. He was Cline's boss and the son-in-law of Cowboy Copas, another famous old cowboy who was also on board. Hawkshaw Hawkins, who had taken the place Billy Walker had vacated, was the last person to join them. Walker got word of a family issue and chose to take a commercial flight home instead. The plane took off from Kansas City and stopped in Rogers, Arkansas, for its first planned refueling stop. The group then went on to Dyersburg, Tennessee, where they arrived at the town's airport at 5 p.m. The weather was getting worse very quickly. There were strong winds and it was hard to see. For their own safety, the airport boss told them to stay the night. He even offered free food and a place to stay. Hughes was set on going, though, and told him, "I've already come this far. We'll get there before you know it." Hughes continued the trip even though he wasn't certified to fly on instruments alone. He wanted to get to Nashville's Cornelia Ford Air Park, so the plane took off at 6:07 p.m. A few minutes later, at about 6:20 p.m., disaster struck. Flying through bad weather with poor visibility, the plane crashed in a heavily wooded area near Camden, Tennessee, about 90 miles short of their destination. Cline's wristwatch, which was later found in the wreckage, showed that the plane crashed at 6:20 p.m., killing all 4 people on board. In the hours that followed, as news of the missing plane spread, family, friends, and fans held out hope. Phone lines in Nashville were jammed with people calling for updates. Emergency services had a hard time getting in touch with each other. At Cornelia Fort Air Park, the runway lights stayed on all night, waiting for a plane that would never arrive. Radio and TV reports said the plane was missing, which led to a large-scale search. The wreckage was finally found in the Tennessee woods at dawn on March 6. The news was devastating not only for the people who loved Patty, but also for the millions of music fans who saw her as a unique voice in American music. Her death, along with those of Copus, Hawkins, and Hughes, was a huge loss for country music. It was the tragic end of a rising star whose legacy would last for generations. Before dawn on the morning after Patsy Cline's small plane went missing in the woods near Camden, Tennessee, on March 5, 1963, hope was still alive in the hearts of those closest to her. One of them was singer-songwriter and fellow artist Roger Miller. Miller and a friend were determined to find answers, so they searched the area since the plane had last been seen. They were searching desperately because they were scared, didn't know what to expect, and needed to find survivors right away. Miller later remembered the terrifying moment very clearly. As fast as I could, I ran through the woods, screaming their names through the brush and trees, and I came up over this little rise. Oh my God, there they were. It was horrible. The Piper PA-24 Comanche had crashed nose down into the forest, killing all 4 people on board, passenger Patsy Cline, cowboy Copus, Hawkshaw Hawkins, and pilot Randy Hughes, at impact. The crash site was badly damaged from the violent descent, and it was a terrible scene for Miller and those who saw it. As soon as the bodies were taken away by police, the crash site, Patsy Cline's body was brought back to her hometown of Winchester, Virginia, for her memorial service. The town was filled with grief, and thousands of mourners came from all over the country to say goodbye to the singer whose voice had defined a generation. Her gold casket was placed under a small white funeral tent, but the crowds grew beyond its borders. To honor Cline, a lot of people rushed to touch or take the flowers that were laid around her grave. They loved the woman so much and wanted to keep her memory alive. She was buried at Shenandoah Memorial Park in the town where she was born and raised. A simple but powerful bronze plaque reads, Virginia H. Dick. Her real name is written next to her name, Patsy Cline. Death can't kill what doesn't die, and in Camden, Tennessee, near the crash site off of Mount Carmel Road, a solemn memorial stands to honor the life of one of the world's greatest musicians. It stands in the woods, a reminder of how fragile life is and how powerful Patsy Cline's legacy will always be. Along with death, Patsy Cline's first marriage was complicated and ultimately failed. It showed the conflict between her personal dreams and traditional family expectations. On March 7, 1953, when she was 20, she married Gerald Cline, a businessman from Frederick, Maryland. Gerald's family owned a successful contracting and excavating company, and he came from a background very different from the rough and tumble world of honky-tonks, dance halls, and country music stages. They met at the Moose Lodge in Brunswick, Maryland, where Cline was performing with Bill Pierce's band. Gerald was quickly smitten with the young singer's confidence and charm. It might not have been love at first sight when Patty saw me, but it was for me, he said later. Their relationship didn't last long. Gerald was smitten by Patty's beauty and charm and wanted her to have a more normal life, without long nights on the road or smoky bars. Even though Gerald admired her ability, they had big differences in their goals and ways of life from the start of their relationship. Cline was already well known in the local music scene. She put all of her energy into shows and jumped at every chance to move up in her career. Gerald, on the other hand, had more traditional ideas about marriage. He wasn't ready for a wife whose love lay in a demanding, male-dominated job that required her to travel a lot and work late hours. Cline's brother Sam said that Gerald liked fancy cars and women, which suggests that Patty may not have found Gerald to be a good fit for her morals or stability. In spite of this, Gerald tried to help her out in the beginning by going with her to many one-night stands and local shows. Still, as she became more famous and her routine got busier, the stress in their relationship grew. To make things worse, Gerald found it harder to deal with her busy job and the freedom that came with it as her singing career got more serious. In the end, Cline told a friend that she didn't think she really knew what love was when she married Gerald. This moving admission shows the uncertainty that comes with first love and getting married young, especially for someone as determined and driven as Patty. The couple's relationship got worse over time, and by the end of 1956, they were living apart. In 1957, they finally got a divorce. Charlie Dick and Patsy Cline's second marriage was as full of life and depth as the woman herself. On September 15, 1957, they got married, starting a bond that would be very important in both of their lives. In 1956, Cline met him while playing with a neighborhood band in Winchester, Virginia, where she grew up. Charles Dick worked as a loo-type operator at the Winchester Star, the local newspaper, at the time. He was young, sure of himself, and good-looking, and from the first time they met, sparks flew, though there was also a touch of fire. When they met for the first time, Cline's sass and charm were clear. When Dick asked her to dance, she said, "I can't dance while I'm working, okay?" This showed how independent and straightforward she was. In any case, that first conversation led to a relationship. They spent more time together quickly, and Cline quickly understood that this was not like any other relationship she had been in. She told the people closest to her how she felt, including the great old Opry pianist Del Wood. In 1956, she told him excitedly, "Hose, I have some news. I met a boy my age who's a storm in pants. Del, I'm in love, and this time it's real." This was a feeling of hope and certainty that was very different from her first marriage, which had lacked both emotion and passion in the bedroom. A lot of people said that Patty and Charlie's relationship was both deeply passionate and wildly unstable. They had 2 kids together, Julie and Randy, and Patty loved them very much. Having a child changed her life in new ways, but it didn't change her goals or her ties to the music world. Charlie was a big part of her life even as she became famous, even though their marriage was never easy. Maybe the best way for authors Robert Orman and Mary Buffwack to describe their relationship is as one that is fueled by drinking, fighting, love, jealousy, success, tears, and laughter. This mix of instability and love was like the passionate energy in Patty's music. The 2 people often fought. Both of them had strong wills and short-fused tempers, and drinking made their arguments worse. There were times when they fought loudly and violently, but they loved and admired each other very much, which kept them together. Pulling. Ollie Nassau, historian, says that Patsy Cline and Charlie Dick's marriage was marked by frequent and heated fights. They loved each other very much, but their intense personalities often got in the way. People who knew them said that when they disagreed, it could get very heated, and Cline herself wasn't one to back down from a fight. Their troubled relationship became part of the legend surrounding the country music star. It was a rough marriage between 2 strong-willed people who were both dealing with the stresses of fame, family, and personal problems. Aside from that, the pair became known for drinking a lot. At parties and other social events, they were often seen with drinks in their hands, which made things even worse in their relationship. They did drink a lot, but Dick was quick to defend. Cline died in a terrible plane crash when she was 30 years old. Dick was heartbroken, but eager to carry on Cline's work. He finally got married again in 1965 to country singer Jamie Ryan. Both of them had a child together, but in the early 1970s, they got a divorce. Dick never forgot about Patsy Cline, even after his second marriage ended poorly. Not only personally, but also professionally, she was always a part of his life. Around the years, Charlie Dick turned into one of Cline's most devoted fans of his music and memory. A number of films, such as Remembering Patty and The Real Patsy Cline, were made with his help and honor her life and work. These shows helped bring her music to new audiences and cemented her place as a pioneer in the history of country music. In the 1990s, Dick teamed up with Hallway Productions to work on projects other than Cline's story. Among the famous acts he helped make documentaries and videos about were Willie Nelson, the Mamas and the Papas, and many more. He cared a lot about music history and wanted to honor the voices of people whose music had shaped American society. It was more than 50 years after Patty's death that Charlie Dick passed away in 2015. And it was only right that he was buried next to her at Shenandoah Memorial Park in Winchester, Virginia, the town where their story started. His love for her during their marriage and in the years afterward helped make sure that Patsy Cline's voice would never be forgotten. The sound of her songs and the love of a man who never stopped believing in her will last forever. They were together in death as they were in life. Let's talk about Patsy Cline's will now. Patsy Cline stayed at 608 South Kent Street in Winchester, Virginia, from 1948 to 1953. This is where she grew up. A place of living that would become deeply connected with her early musical journey and her rise to fame. This simple two-story house, which is now a museum, is very important to both the singer's personal history and the history of country music as a whole. The house was built over the years from what was originally a log home in the middle of the 9th century. Its humble beginnings were an important part of Patty's story. The house Patty moved into was already occupied by her mother Hilda Hensley and her brothers. Patty was exposed to music at a young age while growing up in this close-knit family. It was in the comfort of this home that her love for singing started to grow. Hilda, Pat's mother, was a very important part of her early singing life. Hilda had an impact on Patsy that went beyond just sparking her interest in music. She was very helpful when her daughter made her first stage outfits, which would later become an important part of Patty's public image. There was a close bond between the mother and daughter, and this is where Patty's first live performances started. Patty's small, plain house on Kent Street was a far cry from the glamorous life she would finally live, whether she was on local radio shows or at small business events. Still, it was the base on which she built her business. It was here that she first sang on local radio shows, where she improved her voice and her desire to become a professional singer became clear. Pat's voice echoed through the walls of this house. It was rough, strong, and full of emotion. This house would become a quiet haven and the start of the rise of one of country music's biggest stars. You can tell how important this house is by the memories of Pat's childhood and the fact that it is a historical place. The house is now on both the National Register of Historic Places and the Virginia Landmarks Register. This is because of its cultural and historical value. Honorary titles like these remind us of how much Patty affected American music and the rich past she came from. People who go to the site can walk through the rooms where Patty grew up and see where her musical career started. They can connect with the humble beginnings of a woman who would change the face of country music. There is now a museum at 608 South Kent Street that is all about Patsy Cline's life and work. The museum gives people a personal look into the life of the young woman who would become famous through exhibits and objects. She has early radio recordings, personal items, and even examples of the stage costumes her mother helped her make. These things bring Patty's story to life in the place where it all started. The museum honors her gifts to music and keeps alive the memory of the place where her dreams began. Patsy Cline lived in an apartment on the second floor at 824 East Patrick Street in Frederick, Maryland, from 1952 to 1956. This is an important place for her early work. During this time, Patty's life was changing. She was determined, she was having a hard time, and she was becoming a star. This Frederick apartment became a sign of her early years as an artist, when she worked hard and didn't give up, even though she wasn't yet famous or well-known like she would become in later years. Patty was already getting noticed for her strong voice and charming stage personality when she moved into the apartment. But she was still figuring out how to work in the music business and wasn't in the national press yet, which would later make or break her career. She was trying to make a name for herself in the competitive world of country music by performing more often. In these formative years, living in Frederick put her in a central location from which she could keep looking for gigs in nearby towns while still being able to live in relative comfort. Even though the apartment wasn't fancy, it was typical of the kind of places that many hopeful artists at the time lived while they tried to make a name for themselves. People often said that Patty lived simply because she spent her limited time and money on improving her music business instead of on comforts or nice things. At that time, she wasn't quite the polished star that the whole world would come to know and love. Still, it was in this apartment that she started to build the skills that would lead to her future success. She performed in her hometown, recorded demos, and finally made it to Nashville. Frederick, Maryland, was a good place for Patty to live in her early years. Because the city was close to Washington, D.C., Patty was able to perform in bars, dance halls, and honky-tonks in the area. She also went on radio shows that helped her become better known. She continued to grow as an artist in this setting, where she learned how to perform for crowds, improved her singing, and made connections with other musicians and people working in the business. While Patty was living at 824 East Patrick Street, she began to see that her dreams of becoming a country music star were becoming more real. It was during this time that she began recording more songs and slowly became known as an up-and-coming artist in the local music scene. She made some early records that would become classics in her discography while she lived in this apartment. That sign is a reminder of all the years she worked hard and gave up things in Frederick, Maryland, as she tried to reach her goals. The sign not only shows where she lived, but it also reminds us of how determined and hardworking she was on her way. People who visit the site can think about how far she has come from those poor beginnings to become one of the most famous people in country music history. 824 East Patrick Street in Frederick is important for more than just the space itself. It shows a time when Patty was still thinking, having trouble, and trying to get noticed. The years she spent in the apartment were crucial to her growth as an artist and helped her become the star she would become. There is now a plaque that remembers her time there. It shows how dedicated she was to her craft and to the place where her story as a singing legend really began to take shape. Patsy Cline bought a house in Goodlettsville, Tennessee, in 1962 with a $22,000 royalty check from Decca Records. This was a dream she had had for a long time. The house, which she would use as a refuge and a sign of her success, was just outside of Nashville. It gave her and her family the peace and quiet of country life, away from the noise and chaos of the city. In that moment, Patty was becoming one of the most beloved singers in country music, and this house was the result of years of hard work, sacrifice, and persistence. The house was a nice size at 2,770 square feet, with 4 bedrooms, 3 baths, and enough room for Patty, her husband Charlie Dick, and their 2 young children, Julie and Randy. The house was on a quiet piece of land surrounded by trees, which gave Patty a sense of privacy that she really liked after years of hard tours and performances. This house was a dream come true for someone who had lived in small apartments for most of her childhood. It was a sign of both personal and professional success. Patty's personal taste could be seen in the way the house was decorated, which was a mix of mid-century modern style and cozy southern charm. She had friends and fellow country music stars over here, like Loretta Lynn and Johnny Cash, who were close friends of Patty's. The house became a place where people from the country music community could get together. Musicians and their families could hang out and enjoy the closeness of their group. Patty, who was known for being kind and friendly, was the center of these get-togethers, making everyone feel welcome and making everyone laugh. Even though this house was full of happiness and hope, Patty would only live there for 10 months before she tragically died in a plane crash on March 5, 1963. She made moments with her family and friends that will last a lifetime in the short time she spent at her dream home. But those moments would end in a terrible way. When Patty died, there was a huge hole in the music world. Her husband Charlie and their children had to grieve the loss of the woman whose love and skill had filled their lives. The house was sold to Wilma Burgess, who was also a famous country music singer, after she died. For a few years, Burgess liked living in the house before it was sold again. The house had new owners over the next few years, but it still stood as a reminder of Patty's legacy and the heights she had reached in her career. In the past few years, the house has been carefully restored to keep its original mid-century style. In order to remember the woman who had lived there before, the restoration work tried to bring the house back to its former glory while capturing the spirit of the time it was built in. The house was lovingly restored to match the popular mid-century modern style during Patty's lifetime. The clean lines, big windows, and open floor plan were all put back together with great care. The house was built in December 2021. The house sold for $540,000, which showed both how important it was historically and how much people still want homes with interesting history.